good and safe.
The midterm test began on Monday morning. Spanish was first. Anjani arrived so late that I had already finished translating the 10 silly sentences about mommy in the supermarket, daddy in his office, and sister at the hairdresser's. I was reading a book. Mr. Tawari was reading too. I could see from his face that it was one exciting newspaper. His mouth was hanging open, and he wasn't looking at us at all. So as soon as Anjani sat down, I placed my translation where she could see it. At break time, Anjani was sick with fright. Maths was next. We were walking back to the classroom when the bell rang, and Anjani suddenly turned and started to run in the opposite direction. I caught up with her outside. She was bent over a drain vomiting. We got back to the classroom about 5 minutes late. The circus horse was giving out question papers, and she stopped with a paper in midair. So where Miss Mastana Baha and her shadow just coming from, may I ask? A few children giggled and then fell silent. Anjani was feeling sick, I informed Mrs. Lopez, curtly, as I helped Anjani get into her seat. She continued to glare at us for a moment, then sucked her teeth and went on giving out papers. Anjani's face was gray. As she read through the question paper, she trembled and twisted her fingers together. I knew that this was one test I could not help her with, for Mrs. Lopez would be watching us like a hawk. Before the end of the week, we began to get our test results. The circus horse walked heavily and reproachfully into the classroom one day. She dropped our pile of test papers onto the table and stared at us as if she were too offended to even talk. We knew that we would have to suffer a speech before we could hear our marks. So we settled back and waited for the worst. I don't know what some of you are doing here. I just don't know. You think that secondary school is just wash your foot and jump in? No. Secondary school is for people with brains. Some of you have no business here. She glared at Marlon Peters, Anjani, and a few others around the class. Marlon Peters smiled broadly and turned his head from side to side, bowing, as though he was surrounded by cheering crowds. You see, Mrs. Lopez exploded. Look at that grinning fool. He should go and sing calypso, not come here for people to hurt their head trying to teach him something that will uplift him. And take Miss Jugmohan sing now, always sleeping in class, when she is here at all. Girl, why you don't just stay home and help them make garden? Mrs. Lopez pronounced it garden, to make fun of the way people like us spoke. You have no use for secondary school. 5%. 5 marks out of 100. That is what Miss Jugmohan Singh made in my maths test. And the Calypsonian, 4. 4 out of 100. Anjani sat with her head bowed, still as a statue, while Mrs. Lopez read out everybody's marks except mine. What had I done to this lady now? What special torture did she have in store for me? She paused and started to arrange her face into a pleasant expression. When she had succeeded, she turned this pleasant expression on me. Laetitia Johnson, 98%, she announced. And she held up my paper as the class went into a chorus of oohs and ahs, and even some whistles. Mrs. Lopez realized that this would get out of hand in a second, and brought it to a swift end by changing back into her normal, scornful face. See me after, Laetitia Johnson, she ordered when there was a silence. Now we will go over the test paper. Later, Mrs. Lopez talked to me in the conference room, which students called the courthouse. Some called it the latrine, for it was said that some students could get a sudden running belly when they were summoned by their teachers. You are a bright girl, Mrs. Lopez said in a coaxing voice. You are way above those other children. So you have to be careful if you want to get ahead, you hear? Pick your friends. Don't mix up with any and everybody. They will want to drag you down with them. You make sure and stay far away from these children. They have no ambition. The circus horse talked on, and the more she talked, the more determined I became. I would show this woman that I was no friend of hers.
He missed the sea fast since the weekend, for he came in quite late the first few nights of that week. I was usually in the bedroom by then, reading or getting ready for bed. The table was always set and waiting for him, and at whatever hour he arrived, Miss Velma would shuffle out to the kitchen to warm his food. One evening, he had came home while I was still at the dining room table, studying for the geography test. I heard the car come in, and he was on his way up the steps when he seemed to slow down. Then he was calling to Miss Velma from the gallery in a stern voice to bring the newspapers for him. He didn't come in to eat until much later, when I was already dropping off to sleep. On Thursday night, I packed my bag for the weekend. Everybody would be so proud of my midterm test results. Pappy might make a speech. Ma would only say, but a little smile would be pulling at the corner of her mouth. Uncle Leroy might do anything, give me a sip of beer, let me ride his bicycle out the trace and back, or make some funny toy for me out of wood and wire and crown corks. Or maybe he would think I was getting too big for that now. The test was over and there was no homework. It was still early, so I would be able to lie in bed and read for a while. Then Mr. Cephas came home. He was much too early. I knew that this was a bad sign. I heard him sit down in the drawing room and then get up again. He walked into the kitchen and then back out into the drawing room. After a few moments, Miss Velma appeared over me. She whispered nervously that my father wanted to see me. I came out with the book in my hand. "Good evening," I said. "Good evening, who? Your grandmother teach you to disrespect me, eh? Good evening, dog, cat, who?" He was using the voice he used for taking Michael in hand. "Good evening, sir," I said. His mouth fell open. He almost gasped. "Sir? Children calling their fathers sir, no? You know that I am your father?" "Yes, father," I said, which didn't make him much happier. He seemed to give up. "What you doing in the bedroom?" "Reading, father." "You reading your school book? You studying? Let me see. What is this, storybook?" I nodded. "Aha," he said. "You lying down in your bed reading storybook and Miss Velma in the kitchen with all the work? You're going to be a worthless woman? That is how your mother and your grandmother bringing you up?" He seemed to expect an answer, but I had none, and I simply stood and stared back at him. He shifted himself in the armchair, then he cleared his throat. "Look here," he said. "My house is not a hotel. You can't come here and line for the week, and then weekend you pick up yourself and you're gone. I don't have money for you to be joyriding up and down the country. I doing my duty to feed you and clothe you and see about your schooling, not to send you joyriding up and down the country. And for me to feed you and clothe you, you will have to stay and give me a hand in this house." He fidgeted in his chair again, then bent down and began tying his shoelaces, or untying them. I wasn't sure which. He looked up and I was still standing rooted to the spot. He tried to smile. "You finished reading? Go ahead and done now."
So I stayed in Mr. Cephas's house for the weekend again. And again, nobody came to rescue me and take me home. No Uncle Leroy, no Ma. I didn't go to see Mazzeline because that would be harassing her to find herself in her house one week and after another. In any case, this weekend, Mr. Cephas did not go out much or for very long. He stayed at home for hours on end, shouting at Michael and then trying to start a conversation with me. He complained to me that Michael was a wayward boy and not learning anything at school, and how he wished that Michael could not be more like his big sister. He praised me for the neatness of the drawing room, which I had cleaned on Saturday morning. He asked me when were those teachers going to give me a test so I could get a chance to lick all the other children in the classroom, and I said I don't know. For the following week, I made sure to get every math assignment wrong. I wrote neatly, drew tidy margins, and followed the method obediently up to a point when I thought it was time to spoil things. The circus horse was driven to despair, and Jenny was in a worse state than ever. She said she had failed almost everything in the midterm test. She had headaches for all day long, and as usual, she was tired from all the work she had to do at home. And the sadder she looked, the more Mr. Lopez trampled on her. She started to talk about dropping out of school.
I didn't know what to say to her. At first, I took it lightly. Well, Lopez will be glad. She will give one big going away party for you. And Janice smiled and a sad, tried smile. As the day passed, I realized that she was really giving up. I only wasting taxi fare to come here. Better I stay home and help my mother. I'm not learning nothing. You mad or what? You can't leave school now. After you fight up to pass common entrance and you reach in here, you're going to throw away your chance just so? I don't have no chance again, Lacey. I too far behind for me to catch up. I would have to take lessons, and where I get money for that. Lessons, what that is. After school lessons every day, and Jenny's bus didn't leave until 4 o'clock. We could study together every day after school. I will give you lessons, Aunt Jenny. We will stay back every day and do some work together. She opened her eyes wide. What your father will say when you're reaching home late every day. That will only make trouble for you. Step up. He reaching home 6, 7, 8 o'clock and all. And Miss Velma, I will just tell her I'm staying back to study with a friend. She's not going to make no trouble. So we sat in the classroom and afternoons and worked together until it was time for Anjani to catch her bus. In every subject, Anjani seemed to be starting from scratch, and she was so tired and sleepy that she could hardly think. After our sessions, I walked to the bus station with her and speed home. One ever knew with Mr. Cephas, any day he might suddenly decide to come home straight from work. I was getting home well after 4 o'clock on afternoon, and Miss Velma was not too comfortable with the arrangement. She pleaded with me to be careful. Bit by bit, and Jenny's work started to improve. One day in geography class, the teacher handed back our exercise book, and when Anjani opened hers, her whole face lit up. She passed the book over to me with a broad, grateful smile. She had got 6 marks out of 10.
It was clear now that Mr. Cephas was never going to give me bus fare to go home again. Another weekend passed and I remained, stranded in La Puerta. I wrote a letter to Ma asking what I should do. I hoped, of course, that she would send somebody right away to pick me up and to tell off my father for trying to keep me away from home. But days passed and nothing of the sort happened. Then a letter came from Uncle Leroy. Ma's instructions were to stay where I was until the Christmas holidays, which were now only a few weeks away. She had enclosed bus fare, but only for an emergency. Right away, I got into trouble at school. The circus horse gave us an assignment to do in class, and at the end of the period, I handed up a perfectly blank page with my name and address, Sucral Trace Balletier, written neatly in the top right-hand corner. In the next period, I joined with Marlon Peters and Naushad Ali in one of their plots to drive Mr. Tawari out of his mind. Miss Hafiz summoned us to the conference room. Laetitia, she said dryly, these 2 gentlemen love this room, so they're always doing something to get inside here. Peters and Ali living in here. But you, what you doing here? With Miss Hafiz, one did not give a rude and foolish answer like, you said to meet you here, miss. There was nothing about her that made you feel like stepping out of line. Miss Hafiz did not tolerate any nonsense, and we knew that it was because she was on our side. She wanted us to do well. If the 2 foolish boys had not been there, I would have explained everything to Miss Hafiz. But it was no business of these 2 fools that I wanted to go home and was not allowed to. That would just be one more joke for their clown show. So I just laid my complaints against the circus horse and Mr. Tiwari. Miss, when she come in the class, she does look at us as if she's smelling something bad, and she too unfair. She does treat Anjani like if she is some dog, and Anjani never trouble the lady at all, and she don't bother to explain nothing when the children don't understand the maths. She ain't care about us, As for Mr. Tiwari, we don't learn a thing in his class. He is a living dead. Marloon and Naushad were nodding furiously while I spoke. They wanted to add their piece, but Miss Hafiz stopped them. All right, listen to me. Make this the last time I get any bad reports about any of you from these teachers. You don't have to like all your teachers, but you have to do your work and get out of here. When you play the fool, you don't harm the teachers, you harm yourself. Don't give them cause to report you again, because then we'll have to discuss the matter with your parents. That means you too, Miss Johnson. You really messing yourself up, girl, and if you don't stop, your parents will have to know. One afternoon when I got home, my father was there already, waiting for me. I didn't know it, but he had just seen me outside the bus station where Anjani and I always lingered for a few minutes before she got on the bus. Of course, he wants to know what business I had over there, and my explanation did not please him one bit. I could not care less. So you playing woman now? You could just go where you want, when you want, and out of all the children it's having that big school, the only thing you could find to friend with is a coolie? He ranted and raved, and I stared at him coldly. Miss Velma was hiding somewhere, terrified. This is a decent house, and so long as you're living here, you will behave like decent people, and decent girls don't go knocking all about the town. You want to play hot foot? Not here at all. When you see school over, you just find yourself home one time. I going to check up on you. You hear me? Yes, Mr. Cephas. He nearly choked. Right, good. Give me a damn rudeness. Who is Mr. Cephas, eh? Who you calling Mr. Cephas? God does not punish ungratefulness. You hear? We stared at each other for a moment, and then he seemed to sag in his chair like a bundle of old clothes. Go and help your stepmother, he said wearily.
That was the end of after-school lessons. I convinced Anjani that we could cut some of Mr. Tarawari's classes to continue working together. Mr. Tarawari wouldn't even miss us. Many children were absent every Spanish class, and he didn't even seem to notice or care. We sat on a little bench behind the music room. Anjani didn't like the idea of cutting classes, and she was very jumpy. She tried her best to concentrate, but nothing stuck in her head, and she was falling further and further behind every day. Once I lost my patience with her over a simple little math operation that she could not remember, no matter how many times I showed her the steps. In the end, I heard myself shouting at her, "But everybody learned this for common entrance, man. And you sit common entrance twice. How you don't know it yet? Chinaman, try." Anjani's eyes filled up with tears. "You see," she said, "I tell you I can't learn. I didn't mean it so, Anjani. I didn't mean it so. Come, let's start over." But the day was already spoiled. I was still at war with the circus horse, although I had to be careful not to do anything that she would report me for. The new plan that I hit upon was to do all her assignments for 2 days and get 100 on everything, followed by 2 days of 0, then I would go back up to 100, then back to 0, and so on. The circus horse washed her hands off me. If only Mr. Cephas would also wash his hands off me. I couldn't understand why he didn't just send me home. I had nothing to say to him but good morning and good night, and he was full of vexation all the time now. He couldn't find anything to scold me for. Whenever he was at home, I was either in the kitchen with Miss Velma or at the dining room table poring over my school books. I only read in bed when he was out. He couldn't find any reason to quarrel with me, but he growled at Miss Velma all the time. He made Michael read nearly every night and hit him with the book when he stalled. He made long, angry speeches about how much food was wasted in his house and how many lights were left on carelessly without any regard for who was paying the light bill, and how some people thought the money grew on trees. Why, for the life of me, didn't he just send me home? I had made up my mind that I wasn't coming back to this house.
When I went home for Christmas vacation, I would persuade Ma not to send me back. I would go to school from Schuylkill Trace, even if it meant getting up in what Ma called 4 in the morning and walking all the way down to the junction to meet the bus. Meanwhile, I would have to work on getting a good report to take home to Ma's house. She had not put in a licking on me since I was 10 years old, but now there was no reason to believe that she wouldn't do it now. I began to go regularly to Spanish class. Mr. Taruari was still a dead loss, and I would learn all the Spanish I needed from the book. But I didn't want him writing in my report that I had been cutting classes. I was even polite to the circus horse, and I started doing her assignments properly again. The end of term exam was near, and Anjani and I studied together at lunchtime, at break time, and even for a little time after school. Mr. Cephas could check up on me all he wanted to. Soon I would be out of his reach forever.
I was fully packed and ready to go 2 weeks before the end of term. I had it all planned. I would take one back to school with me on the last day of term. I would use the bus fare Ma had sent to go home. Then during the vacation, Uncle Leroy would come to La Puerta and fetch the rest of my belongings. The Christmas breeze was softening my father's mood. Parang music was in the air, and carols and all the jingles about Christmas shopping. Miss Velma was swinging cushions and curtains. The next door neighbors were painting, and the people opposite had colorful flashing lights strung into the branches of the Julie mango tree in their front yard. Mr. Cephas brought home a steady stream of cronies for our Christmas drink, and he was in high spirits all the time. So you're spending Christmas with your daddy and your Tante Velma for the first time, eh? He said to me one evening, stopping short of putting his arm around me. No, I answered, I'm going home. His face fell and he said in a dull voice, all right, I will drop you down Saturday. No, it's okay, I take in the bus. What? He snapped. For your grandmother to wash her mouth on me? Just get yourself ready and wait for me Saturday after lunch. That lady will not have it to say that Orville Cephas is a this and Orville Cephas is a that. Not at all. I did not fancy the long drive to Schuylkill Trace alone in the car with him again. So I asked if Michael would come too. Mr. Cephas agreed and Michael was overjoyed. As soon as his father went out of the room, he threw his dusty arms around me and hugged me tight. He smelled like a ram goat, but I couldn't spoil his happiness by telling him to go and bathe. The end of term exam came. Anjani did a little better in some of her subjects, but she knew that she was still failing. We were having a class party on the last day of term. Everyone was asked to bring something to eat or drink. Anjani, very flustered, said she would bring something to drink. Afterwards, she went to Miss Hafiz and told her that she was not coming to the party because she had no money to buy anything. Miss Hafiz asked her whether she had any sour lemons in her yard. Well, you bring some sour lemons and we will go in the home ec room and make some lemonade for everybody. We decorated the classroom with balloons and paper streamers and flowers. Miss Hafiz told us she was keeping our report books until after the party, because she wanted everybody to have a good time. We did. Even Anjani looked bright and cheerful. Marlon Peters and his gang put on a little play about school. We laughed so much we were almost rolling on the floor. Marlon Peters had smuggled his big sister's clothes out of the house. All her clothes, it seemed. He wore about 3 skirts of different colors, one on top of the other, and any number of blouses. His wrists were crowded with bangles, real ones and ones he had made out of wire, plastic, twine, anything. Around his neck, too, he wore a bunch of necklaces of every description. His face was heavily powdered with flour, and he had smeared bright red lipstick on his mouth and cheeks. There was so much stuff painted around his eyes that they looked like a panda's eyes. Somebody in his family had played in the carnival band Warriors of the Amazon, and he was wearing the headpiece, a wig made of hanging black string. 2 colorful Christmas tree decorations were tied onto the headpiece on either side of his face for earrings. He also wore stockings, which were slowly sliding down his legs, and carried a handbag. Marlon Peters wobbled in on tall-heeled pointed shoes, with his nose in the air, carrying some exercise books. He flung the exercise books down on the floor and gave a long speech in a ridiculous lady voice. Take all your old nasty books and get away from me. You have no right in here. Your head too hard, you're too dunce, you're too ugly, you're too black, you have no manners, you have no parents. I don't want to see all you. I am going for the principal. And he wobbled out to wide applause, just as one of his grandmother's stockings finally flopped down around his ankle. After the party, Mr. Fierce distributed report books. Anjani was afraid to open hers, so I didn't look into mine either. I walked with Anjani to the bus station. That was a nice party, she said, grinning as broadly as she had done on the first day of school. Yes, girl, I answered, and I did a few mincing steps with my head in the air like the circus horse. We held our sides and shirked with laughter, remembering Marlon Peters' outfit. And you ain't see the stockings? Anjani gasped, sending us into more peals of laughter. We had to wipe our eyes with a handkerchief. That old Sukana, I said, when I was able to talk again. Next term, we will show her maths. Next term, you get a 99.1% in that lady maths test. Wait, you see. Let's see how I get a 99.1% in Mrs. Lopez maths. You know how to do it, magic, eh? We're going and work up your on she. We followed up with laughter again. No, child, you forgot I'm not coming back by Mr. Cephas. From next term, we could study every day after school because I'm taking bus too. Oh, she said, looking thoughtful. You lucky. Yes. I don't want to see her again in my whole life. I don't know how my mother could have ever friend with a foolish man like that. A mischievous look came over Anjani's face. She put her hand over her mouth and leaned towards my ear. They was in love. Anjani, she darted away as I swung my back at her. Anyway, she said, trying to make her face serious and wise. I mustn't talk big people talk with little children. You ain't get your monthly yet. So you get yours? Yep, she said. I felt a blow of sadness as though Anjani had taken one big step away from me. You getting yours any day now? She said in a comforting voice. We were quiet for a time. Suppose I had a different name, she said suddenly. I was puzzled. Like what? Like Anjani Mirage or Nemingsai or something. She was looking at me and smiling, first day of school smile. And I knew what she meant. I remembered how the principal had paired us by calling our names in alphabetical order. Then you might get Marlon Peters for your partner instead, and the two of you would have married. Let's see, she scolded, and I had to lean up on a wall so as not to collapse with laughing. The station was still some distance away, and we had to stop skylarking now, or Anjani might miss her bus. We sobered up and walked arm in arm, pondering on the months just past. So you make a whole term, eh, Anjani? She nodded gravely. I knew that she had still not opened her report book. You didn't do so bad in the exam. Next term we will show them. Anjani's face had become solemn again, but she was still in good spirits. She got on the bus and I stood and waved. Next term, I shouted, next term. Through the window of the moving bus, Anjani shouted back at me, Happy Christmas. All the teachers had written words of glowing praise in my report book, even the circus horse. I would take it to show Marceline I was going to visit her in the morning, to wish her Happy Christmas before I left for home. Late in the evening, Mr. Cephas asked to see my report book. It threw him into a state of excitement. He wanted to keep it to show his boss on Monday morning. He couldn't, however, because it was addressed to Mrs. Wilmina Johnson, Slooker Trace, Laetitia.
For the drive home, I sat in the back seat with Michael, who chatted all the way, but under his breath. He glanced at his father nervously every now and then. Mr. Cephas, however, was paying us no mind at all and never once turned his head around. He seemed bent on getting the task over and done with. When we reached our house, he offloaded me and paid only the briefest of visits much to Michael's disappointment. Coming home again after such a long time, it was as though I was seeing our house for the first time. The board wall seemed to have mildewed a great deal while I was away. Uncle Leroy's addition, which he and his friends had built when I was in Standard 2, looked unfinished. The gray mortar seemed to be spilling out between the red clay bricks. Our bathroom and latrine seemed to have moved farther away from the house. Everything, the house, the kitchen, the bathroom, the latrine, the pig pen, looked a little rickety and old. Ruth and Kennewen were taller. Ruth was helping to carry water now, in a paint tin. Before I went to La Puerta, I was carrying 2 buckets of water at a time, one on my head and one in my hand. Now, just 1 bucket seemed a very heavy thing, and I had to stop and rest for a while. Carlyle was very glad to see me. For a while I was away, he had to carry extra buckets of water, sweep the yard, and collect wood from the fireside, all on top of his own work. Uncle Leroy had even made him weed my garden. For days I got up early and walked down into the land, inspecting everything. On the first morning, down in the garden with Uncle Leroy, I announced that I was not going back to my father's house. "Oh ho, so you're leaving school now?" he asked without stopping what he was doing. "No, I'm going to school from here." Uncle Leroy was still not very impressed. "You tell your grandmother yet?" "No, Uncle." He said. "You want to come back here and eat green fig? You living in a nice house, you driving in a motor car, eating food that they buy in the grocery, and you want to live here instead of there? You ain't have sense, girl." "I don't care. I want to come home," I said sulkily. "And how are you reaching to school? Were you getting taxi fare and bus fare? You working somewhere?" "I don't care. I want to come home," I said sulkily. "And how are you reaching to school? Were you getting taxi fare and bus fare? You working somewhere?" "No, Uncle, but I could get a bus pass." "Yes, and how are you getting from here to Junction to get the bus? You will show the taximan the bus pass and he will carry you for free?" "No, Uncle, I'm not taking no taxi. I will take the bus to Junction." "You know what bus you're talking about there? One bus it have passing here in the early morning, and you know what time it does pass? 5:45. What time you think you will have to get up to catch that bus?" "I could get up early." "Girl, behave yourself, you hear? Look at Carlyle. You don't think he would be glad to go and cock up in a pretty house in Puerta? No water to tote, no pig pen to clean? I give up. I would have to wait for the right moment to tackle Ma." The Christmas work had begun. Dusting, cobwebbing, scrubbing, polishing, and you could feel the excitement growing in our house. 2 days later, Ma gathered together all of her brass and went out into the gallery. She lined them up on the banister. Vases, ashtrays, the big plant pot with a whole Bible story running around it, and a fruit bowl. Then she sat down to polish them with brasso. The smell of brasso and floor polish and varnish meant Christmas. Ma was humming a Christmas hymn while she rubbed away. It seemed a good time to bring up the subject. She did not seem surprised. Uncle Leroy must have spoken to her already. "What it is happened with you and your father?" she asked, looking at me fixedly. I couldn't point to anything that had happened. It wasn't just that I missed coming home on weekends. I didn't want to stay in that house at all, not for one more day. "What it is happened?" Ma insisted. "Nothing, Ma," was all I could reply. "Then why you can't stay there? What you running from?" What could I say to them? I wanted to be home. I didn't want to live there. When I didn't answer, Ma cut the discussion short with a few sharp words before turning back to her polishing. "He is your father. He working for money. Let him mind you." One only argued with Ma inside one's head. I shouted in my head that I had been very well-minded up until I left home, and that I didn't want anything more than I'd always had here at home. Mr. Cephas' house and his car and his money meant nothing to me. I wanted to come home. Damn it. "I want to come home," I heard myself saying meekly to Ma. She stopped rubbing and looked at me for a few seconds. I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Then she dismissed me. "Go and tell your grandfather," she said, knowing full well that I would not dare to take what she called my stupidness to Papi. In any case, when Ma said no, even if Papi were to say yes, the answer would still be no. "And when you finish, tell him you could go and help Carlyle clean out under the house and burn the stuff. I never see so much old shoe, old paper, old cloth in my life. Under there getting like volunteer dumping ground. Then all you have the windows to wash, sorrel to pick, chairs to varnish." And she turned again to vigorously polishing her brass.
By the end of the week, Ma had collected nearly all her army.
Uncle Jamesy had brought up Jennifer, Junior, and Christine since the beginning of the holidays. Carlisle was sent to fetch his little brother, and on Friday at nightfall, Ma's godson Anthony turned up, limping, hungry, and close to tears, with his clothes in a paper bag. His mother didn't have the money to pay his fare from Mai to Gual, which was about 20 miles away, so he had walked. That weekend, everybody helped to put away the house for Christmas. The whole place was dusted and scrubbed, mattresses and pillows hauled into the sun, flower plants trimmed, and the yard mercilessly weeded and swept until it was bald. When we had finished sweeping the yard, the old cocoa broom was in pieces. We had to strip some coconut branches and make a new one. We varnished over the Morris chairs and the dining table, and on Christmas Eve, we would polish the drawing room floor. Uncle Leroy brought home a little tin of dark red paint and a roll of linoleum, which he leaned up in a corner to put down in the gallery on Christmas Eve. The paint was for the front steps. He had made us scrub the steps the day before until the concrete looked almost bleached, and nobody had been allowed to walk on them since then. All the children stood around as he tackled the steps from the top. He wasn't sure that the paint would be enough for all 5 steps, so he was spreading it as thin as it could go. We watched with pride and with excitement as our front steps, leading into our gallery, slowly changed from pale grey concrete to a royal carpet of red. We gathered closer as he moved down to the 4th step, and we held our breaths, for we saw then that there was only a little bit of paint left in the bottom of the pan. Uncle S.Y. had stopped talking. We knew that we would also have to be quiet and still, or he would snap at us or chase us away. The 4th step was finished. We now stood as still as statues, willing to paint the stretch to the last step. Uncle Leroy would pass the paintbrush all around the insides of the pan, and then wipe it on the step again and again until the brush was dry. The top of the last step was covered, now for the front and the sides. He scraped around inside the pan, then wiped the concrete hard with the brush, stroke after stroke, until nothing more could come out of the brush. In the end, the paint tin was clean inside, and our front step closed in color from top to bottom. Everybody shouted, "Hooray!" and Uncle Leroy took off his cap and stretched his head. "Well," he said, "when Lacey pass her high school exam and get her big work, she will buy paint and do the whole house. Not so, Lacey?" And all the children cheered loudly once again. The front step, of course, were now out of bounds until Christmas Eve. The drawing room was bare, for the old curtains had been taken down, and the Morris chairs were lined up facing the wall for the varnish to dry. Their cushions, stripped of covers, were piled in a corner, waiting for Christmas Eve. Tanty Monica was sewing the new cushion covers from the cloth I had bought since October at a sale. The new curtains that Mammy Patsy had sent had not yet been brought forth. There would be disorder for days, the worse the disorder the better, so that as darkness fell on Christmas Eve, the house could turn, by magic, into a strange, rich place, bright with cleanness and newness. In the days before Christmas, it was impossible to anger Ma. Children rolled on the mattresses, put out the sun in the yard, or threw the pillows at each other. Asked to scrub down the chair, they would lose the soap in the bucket of water and end up more wet and soapy than the chair. Fights and loud squabbles broke out now and then, as in any other season. For all of this, Ma only issued one treat, which we knew she could never bring herself to carry out. No Father Christmas. Our Christmas barrel from Mammy Patsy had already come. We knew that the big people would have opened it and taken out the things to eat that might spoil. But after that, they would have put the cover back and clamped it on with the iron ring, as though if the barrel had never been opened. Now it was safely packed in the corner of Ma's bedroom, covered with a sheet. There didn't seem to be enough Christmas work for Ma to do. When everything inside had been dusted or scrubbed or polished until sore, she set upon our clothes, mending, sewing on buttons, letting down hems. This was not a good sign, for after the clothes it was us. warm oil for everyone to clean out all the nastiness in our guts and make room for Christmas eating. It was Uncle Leroy who gave out warm oil. Ma said she was too old now to fight children to get medicine down their throats. So early in the morning, about a week before Christmas, Uncle Leroy roused us from our sleep and marched us out to the kitchen for warm oil. He was not moved by tear or pleas, and he could get the dose of evil smiling, slimy oil through the most tightly clenched of teeth. Then we had to stay around the yard for the rest of the day and not eat anything. We were not to wander off into the land where we might pick tangerines or guavas or whatever was bearing. By the end of the day, we were so completely starved that we could only sit huddled on the back steps, staring down at the kitchen. That evening, Uncle Leroy made an enormous coconut bake with smoked herring and melange turned into vegan coca, and we fell on it like the dogs. It was time for Ma to make her Christmas journey to LP. She was up and getting ready the next morning before we were properly out of bed. She wasn't going to buy anything in LP, she announced in a loud voice, only a piece of clothes to put on the dining room table so that Father Christmas wouldn't see how these children had scratched up her old mother's table till not even varnish could make it look pretty again. She was really going to LP to pay Ma Luzine her Christmas visit, and on the way back she would stop off in Junction and pick up Charlene. But I'm not in no mood to argue with Maharijin. If she wants to give me any speech, Leroy will have to go for his child herself. First, she wants to give up the ghost because the daughter making Creole child or Kilwall child, according to she, and she wants to throw the two of them in the road. Now you nearly have to pull out application form to get to touch the Kilwall child. That old lady must have 1,000 grandchildren. It's 16 children Maharijin have, so she must be have grands till she forget their name. I can't understand why she must be so stinky with mine. And Ma was off down the trace. She wanted no tail behind her, and not even as far as neighbor Felice's house. We were to stay and help Uncle Leroy or no Father Christmas.
I was gone for the whole day, and at about 4 o'clock, the news traveled up the trace that she was on her way in. We hurriedly washed our feet and set out to meet her. Uncle Leroy went with us. We heard Carlene's voice around the bend in the road before we saw them. She was chattering non-stop, and every now and then Ma would answer with a worry, ah, yes, do. Then we turned the bend and Charlene abandoned Ma to rush towards us, shrieking at the top of her voice, Uncle Leroy! Uncle Leroy! Everybody, everybody, look me! I come for Christmas. Uncle Leroy swept her up and hugged her, and then seated her up on his shoulders. We took all of Ma's bags and bundles and made our way home with more commotion than Ma would usually allow. When we got home, Ma sat down heavily and sighed. After she had had her big enamel cup of water and we had taken turns fanning her, she began to tell Pappy about her visit to Marceline. Look how Marceline wants to spoil my Christmas, she complained. I go there calling for my mackerel. No, Celine. Then a niece come out, and when I go inside, Celine flat on her back with the sisters round her. That old lady hadn't. The doctor tell her to keep herself quiet, but no, Celine can't keep still. She gone out digging dasheen and get a bad field. Fall down right there in the dasheen patch. Ma shook her head. That is a hard no, lady. She intended to dead standing up. She's spending Christmas by one of her sisters, but she done start to tell them already that it's only because it's Christmas and not because she's sick. And if they think she's leaving her house to go and live by any of them, they must be drunk. When Christmas done, she coming right back in her patchy. Ma chuckled and then looked worried again. Lacy girl, you mightn't find no Marceline when you go back to La Puerta. I didn't want to think of La Puerta at all. And worse yet, La Puerta with no Mazzoline. But Ma was brightening up. All the children were hanging round to see what she had bought. She dug into one of her bags and fished out some balloons and whistled and then shooed us all away. The little ones ran out blowing whistles noisily, but Ma called Carleen back. "Where you going in that dress, miss? Lacey, take that lady clothes for me, please." I took off Carleen's dress, her shoes, and her socks as quickly as I could, for she couldn't wait to run out into the yard with the others. When I had got everything off except her frilly panty, she rushed out joyfully, then rushed back in to hug Ma, burying her head in Ma's broad lap and trying to get her arms around her waist. "Yes, my dogla baby," Ma cooed. "You tell your nanny you come in and live by your next nanny, you hear?" Tanty Monica and Uncle Jamesy and the baby came up on the day before Christmas Eve. On that day, we baked the Christmas cake and the bread, with the baby going from hand to hand. On Christmas Eve, we were up very early. Nobody wanted to miss 1 minute of the thrilling commotion that would begin before the sun was up and go on until late into the night. Children rushed from one exciting event to another. Sometimes we were torn between 2 or more attractions taking place at the same time. Tanty Monica putting down the bright new linoleum in the veranda, Ma and Uncle Leroy killing the pig down by the shed, Uncle Jamesy climbing onto the roof to nail down galvanized that was sticking up. By 6 o'clock in the evening, most of the cooking had been overcome, and we were finally dressing up the drawing room. Then the children took their tea, some of the Christmas bread with the first pieces from the ham that had been boiling all afternoon in the pitch oil tin, and a cool cup of sorrel full of the smell of clove. On a night like this, Ma would not insist that we drink something hot to warm our chests before going to sleep. After we had eaten and sat in the Morris chairs again to marvel at the beauty of our drawing room, we willingly went to our beds to give Father Christmas a chance to make his ghostly visit. We talked in low, excited voices in the darkened room, the little ones on the bed and all the big ones on bedding spreads all over the floor. Carlisle and Anthony had to find a space on the bedroom floor too. For their usual sleeping place, the drawing room was out of bounds tonight. Out in the drawing room, the big people were opening the barrel from Mammy Patsy and talking in low voices as if they too were waiting for Father Christmas. Uncle Leroy's friends began to fill up the gallery, wishing the house a happy Christmas, talking rowdily all at the same time and singing Quran. Now that I was learning Spanish at school, I could understand a little of what the Christmas songs meant. But Quran was just as pretty, whether or not the words made any sense. One of the party was strumming on a cuarto. Some of them were beating spoons against bottles, and others shaking chak-chaks. After a while, we could hear Papi's voice in the gallery, leading the parang, and the fellas cheering him loudly at the end of each song. We could smell ham passing and black cake, and glasses were clinking. Before we fell asleep, the company had drifted off noisily to another house, taking Uncle Leroy and Uncle Jamesy with them. Sometimes the 2 of them reached back home on Christmas mornings still singing.
And then Christmas was past and I started thinking about school again. Over the season, everything to do with La Puerta had faded out of my mind. It was so hard to believe that such a place as Mr. Sida's house existed. I had to put away the circus horse, too, and even Anjani, Poor Anjani. She was going to come back to school. What's happening to her, I wondered. What would become of Anjani if she had dropped out of school? I tried to believe that she was coming back. I had turned again to think how I could persuade Ma not sending me back to my father. I began to look so miserable that Ma called me one day to talk. I knew it was about the reopening of school. We sat on the back steps together with a big Coca-Cola basket full of beans she shelled. You want to live home? She asked as we tackled the peas. Yes, Ma, I replied. She seemed to have softened a little, though I knew that Ma was not the person who changed her mind easily. She spoke in a kindly voice. You remember, Lacey, when you had passed the exam to go high school? On the top of that, your father said he would mind you. How your mommy was so glad, because now she could save some money so she could get to go to school too. You remember? Yes, Ma. She never get the chance you have, you know. None of my children ever get the chance like that. Your Uncle Leroy was a bright little fella in school. He wanted to be an airplane mechanic. You ever see that? And don't talk about your mother. She worse. You know what she wanted to be? A dentist. Ma looked at me with a proud smile creasing her eyes, and I had smiled too. Although I could tell that this conversation was leading me back straight into my father's house. When your mommy was a little girl, small like Ruth and Charlene, your great-grandmother, God rest her soul, had some false teeth that was always falling down. The plate wouldn't stay in her gum for hell, so she was always cursing the dentist that would give her the plate. She used to say she would find a good dentist that could give her teeth to stay in her mouth. Poor soul, she didn't have no money, so all she could do was curse the dentist behind his back. And Pasty used to hug her up and say, don't mind that, Mommy Christina, don't mind. When I get big, I will become a dentist and stick back your teeth in your mouth for you. Ma was overcome with giggling, most in her bosom. Then they sobered up again, but none of them get further than Belter Government Primary School, bright as they was. She was silent for a while. She wanted me to think, but I already knew that I would go back to Mr. Silver's house. I could not let my mother down. Your mommy, he wanted you to stop living there so he could show off with his daughter. He is not helping you out of the goodness of his heart, you know. He's just using you to puff up his chest. Now Ma was tearing up, opening the pods in the most violent manner, reaching out for the peas, flinging them in the basin. As if he bring you where you reach. He don't know how you get food to eat and the shoes you walk on the road to school all these years and books you learn your lesson so you could come now and pass your exam. Now he that see you through and put you in secondary school. But don't mind, stay and eat all his food. Let him put his hand in his pocket and feed you, clothe you and buy you all the expensive school books, for I don't know where we get the money. She was calmer now, as though she had finished tearing out Mr. Silver's guts with the few pods she had shelled. She turned wistfully to me, and we want to let Mommy Pacey get her chance too, not so?
Ma had sent a message for my father to come for me the Saturday before school reopened at 4 o'clock. He arrived exactly on time, and Ma invited him to come in. She had banished all children to the backyard. Pappy was taking a rest, and Uncle Leroy was down in the kitchen packing a box of vegetables and eggs for me to take to town. Ma told my father that she had given me bus fare to come home for Carnival. She pointed out, rather reproachfully, that it was natural for me to want to see my family. My father agreed wholeheartedly, and nodding with all his might. "How's she behaving?" Ma asked. Good, very good," he replied, again with much nodding. "She helping in the house?" Yes, Ma Willie." "All right," said Ma. "Well, I hope she ain't looking no thinner the next time I see Lacey. See her. Lacey, go and call Carl, and tell Leroy you ready to go." When Carl had loaded my belongings into the car and Uncle Leroy had presented my father with the box of food, Ma allowed the children in, but only after they had washed their feet. The children stood and scrutinized my father's clothes with awe. For sitting in our drawing room, he looked like somebody who had just arrived from America. Pappy came out of the bedroom, and my father sprang out of the chair to shake his hand. "Mr. Johnson, sir," he said, then stepped back, all but saluting my grandfather. Pappy peered at him, as if trying to place him, while he made his way to his chair. "Cephas," he said, when he had seated himself comfortably. "Yes, sir? You come to take up the child?" "Yes, Mr. Johns." "Well, you be sure to give due care and attention to our child. You understand? If any harm befall this child of ours, you shall answer for it. You have more to atone for." "I know, sir." "Fulfill your atonement with honor. Go in peace." My father was only too glad to take his leave. Everybody followed me down in the car, in a noisy procession with dogs leaping around us, and all the little children vying with each other to hold my hand. Just before I got into the car, Ma put her arms around me and rubbed my back. She didn't look at Mr. Cephas. Fast as he could, Mr. Cephas maneuvered his car out of our rough, narrow trace. He was gripping the wheel, and his jaw was set in a stony silence. When he finally got out onto the main road, he seemed to relax a little. By the time we got to the junction, it was as though he felt he was out of Ma's sight and hearing. He loosened up. Then he began his speech. It was first of all about ungratefulness. Look at the opportunity I was getting to live in a decent home, a decent family, instead of that hole I had grown up in, the lower-class hole. Between all those coolie and old nigger, those backward people with no ambition and half-naked children running about with no owner, none of them knew what a decent home was, and so on. Then it was about disrespect. I am your father, and you have to respect me and obey me. Your grandmother and your mother teaching you to disrespect me, but I will show them. I will teach you to respect me. You think because you have a little more schooling than me, that I is nobody and you could disrespect me, but you make a mistake. Everybody will see that my daughter with all her schooling have to respect me. You will behave yourself in my house. It was a very comfortable journey. I wanted to jump out of the car and run back home.
When we arrived at the house, Miss Vilma was in her rocking chair in the gallery, with her head tied and her daily word on her lap. The scene looked very much the same as on the first day I arrived, but things were not the same. Miss Vilma was uncomfortable. She greeted me mournfully as before, but at first she wouldn't look straight at me. When she turned her eyes on me, they were half pleading, half reproachful. As my father slammed down my suitcase in the gallery and stalked back out to the car, I knew that this was going to be a fight to the finish. A great deal of painting had taken place in Mr. Cephas' house over the Christmas holidays, mainly on the outside. The drawing room floor was now covered with a carpet deep as grass, and the Christmas tree was still up. It was a huge one which almost touched the ceiling, and there were so many decorations on it that you could hardly see what kind of tree it was. Before I could start unpacking, Miss Vilma called me into the kitchen to have something to eat. "You spent a nice Christmas?" she asked. "Yes, thank you, Miss Vilma." "Ours wasn't so nice," Miss Vilma said, and was silent for a while. She went and cut a piece of her Christmas cake to put on my plate. Then she sat at the table with me. "Your daddy wasn't so pleased at how you didn't stay here for the Christmas. From the day you leave, he's just holding his head in his hand. And to make it worse, when his friends come in the house, they asking him where his daughter is, and he don't know what to tell them." Miss Vilma got up and shuffled over to the sink with my plate and cup. She continued to speak with her back to me. "You see, he boasts so much about his daughter that now he don't know how to tell people he's not really in charge of you. It spoiled his whole Christmas. I never see him down in the dumps so in the Christmas season." Michael now burst in through the kitchen door. He stopped in his track when he saw me, and a grin spread over his face. "Lacey, you come back." He stood looking shyly at me, then his face changed as though he'd suddenly remembered something. "Coming just now," he said. "Going and bathe." He darted out of the kitchen, and soon we heard the shower running. Miss Vilma smiled sadly. "That is who missed you the most," she said. "Every day he asking, 'When Lacey coming back? Mommy, Lacey not coming back? Mommy, I could go and spend a day by Lacey?'" She lowered her voice. "Poor child. The father ready to give him away because you know he not doing so good in school. But your father's so proud of you. He wants you to go to university and study to be a doctor or a lawyer." That is the hopes he had for Michael, but he gave up on him. Michael never get a good report like yours. The shower stopped, so Miss Vilma changed the topic. She asked how my grandmother was, and all of the others. Miss Vilma was always very vague about my family. She knew about Ma, but after Ma, it was all the others. It was as though she pictured my family as a horde of people out in the Balatier bush whom nobody could count or put names to. Michael hurried back into the kitchen after what was a very brief bath. He was still pulling a jersey down over his head, and when it was on, it was both back to front and inside out. That was of no concern to him. He had come to drag me from the kitchen to show me what he had got for Christmas. There were toy vehicles already missing their wheels, some guns, games that didn't interest him because they were too difficult. He dug through all this to find a storybook that his godmother had given him for Christmas. He begged me to read it for him. I read him one story, and then I turned to unpacking. He talked without stopping and was still talking to me when I got into bed and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Miss Vilma dressed and left for church without looking in on me. Normally, she would check to see whether I wanted to go with her.
When I got to school on the first day, the classroom was full of chattering children. I looked around for Anjani, but she wasn't there. The bell rang and we went down to assembly. It was a long assembly because the principal gave a speech that she called a refresher course on the rules of La Puerta Government Secondary School. When she talked about staying away from the plaza, Doreen Sandyford and her gang rolled their eyes at each other. Assembly lasted for almost the whole of the first period, and as usual, students took as long as they possibly could to file back to their classrooms. By the time we finally settled down for roll call, the second period had begun, and there was still no sign of Anjani. In class, I drew pictures in my book and kept glancing at the door. I was restless and anxious, unable to pay any attention to the lesson. By break time, I had given up. Anjani was not coming. Now it was quite impossible to settle down to schoolwork. For the rest of the day, I read a storybook placed on my lap or scribbled and drew all over the covers of my notebooks. In Mrs. Lopez's class, I put my head down on the desk and slept. The next day was the same. Anjani did not turn up, and I was like a haunted person. I cut Mr. Tiwari's class. I went and sat behind the music room, staring into space and thinking how I would like to see Mr. Cephas dead. I pictured a car accident with his car so mashed up that you couldn't tell the front from the back. Or he could die from some sickness. He could get a stroke and drop down dead in his office. Suppose one day I was sitting in class and the principal sent for me to give me the message that my father was dead. Terrible things could happen to you if you called misfortune down on other people, Ma always said to us. The misfortune could fall on you instead. So I took my mind off Mr. Cephas and thought about home. I was going home on the Friday before Carnival. I would have 4 whole days in Balatier. That brightened me up a little. We would go to see the bands in Junction, and Ma usually kept us home from school on Ash Wednesday because she said she wasn't putting us on the road when there were still fellas all about stale drunk from Carnival. I wondered if she would let me stay home on Ash Wednesday. But then, Carnival was 7 weeks away, and afterwards I would have to come back to Mr. Cephas's house for the rest of the term. It suddenly struck me, I would have to live in Mr. Cephas's house for the rest of my years at school, until I'd finally finished all my exams. That was too much to think about, so I got up and started to make my way back to the classroom for the next period. Another day came, and Anjani still did not turn up. At lunchtime, Doreen Sandyford called me to sit with her gang. They always had lunch at the teacher's desk in our classroom. I was something of a celebrity to them, because they said I didn't forget to give Ma Lopez pound for pound. I ate lunch with them for the rest of the week. The following Monday, Anjani returned. She slid through the door like a ghost, her face thinner and paler than I remembered. It was halfway through the first period, and since I could never get Anjani to talk in class, I had to wait until break time. "What happened to you last week?" I asked impatiently when the bell rang. "I was sick, and the baby was sick," she sighed and put her head down on the desk. "The baby gets sick, so me and my mother carry him to the clinic. When the doctor see me, she say I looking more sick than the baby. She say I have anemia." "Anemia? People doesn't stay home for that. Miss Velma tell me she have anemia. She does just take pills for it. She ain't so sick. The doctors tell you to stay home?" No, she paused. You didn't have money? Yes, I had money. I went and sell in the market every day in the holidays to get money to come back to school. I was well ready for school, but I had to stay and help my mother mind the baby until he get better. Then she added, as if to protect her mother, she ain't have nobody else to help her. And me, I said fiercely, I right back in my father house. And Johnny lifted her head and without speaking showed so much sympathy for me that I felt guilty. I will tell you lunchtime, I promised. Let's go and drink some water and walk about a little bit, no? You go ahead, Lacey. I not feeling for water. We ate our lunch in our usual spot on the far side of the playing field, and Johnny listened gravely to my story. Then she sighed. Well, Lacey, she said, you will have to do that for your mother. Just stay there for now. It wouldn't kill you. Then when you pass your exam, and your mother passed her exam too, you wouldn't have to worry again. She was peering into my face as if she thought I would disagree. I know, I said. I only stay in there for my mother's sake. If it wasn't for my mother, I would have do something to make them put me in back home. Something, I don't know what, but something.
Ginny did not look any better as the days went by. She was so thin now that Marlon Peters began to call her Fatso and Thinzo. Next to Anjani, anybody in the world could seem fat. It was not long before she started to miss days of school again, and once more she was badly out of her depth in every subject. She was eating less and less. Out on our log, she would sit with her lunch almost untouched on her lap and talk in a despairing tone. I have so much work to do home that every night I go into sleep tired, and in the morning I waking up more tired. Sometimes I can't finish my work in time to get ready for school because I'm so tired I can't move fast. Sun does come up and catch me still in my home clothes, and that time it don't make sense coming out. I would reach here midday. So your brothers don't do nothing at all? They can't help your mother too? I asked. They should have my grandmother to deal with. Them? Help? They can't even wash a kerchief. I was washing their clothes since I 8 years old. She stayed ahead of her and was quiet for some time. Then she said in a defeated voice, You know, Lacey, I seen myself just washing clothes, cooking food, sweeping house all the time for the rest of my life, just like my mother. I'm not going to pass my exam. I'm not even going to make the 5 years to the exam. Anjani, I tell you already, let us stay and study after school. I ain't care what Cephas say. No, Lacey, I don't want you to get in trouble. Well, why we don't cut to our class? You think he wants to know if we there or not? He don't care. She shook her head violently. No, Lacey, we not cutting no class. Okay, Miss Holy Mary, you go ahead. I cut in terrory class today. You could go and sit down in front of you, see if you learn anything. This threw her into a terrible state. She begged me not to do anything to get myself into trouble. Lacey, you will fail the exam, or they might expel you for cutting classes, she pleaded with me. Lacey, behave yourself now. On afternoons, I drifted home by a long, roundabout route. Sometimes I walked with Anjani to the bus station, and we stood and talked inside the waiting area. It did not matter to me whether Mr. Cephas saw me down there again, but Anjani was very concerned and insisted that we go inside. On some days, instead of going straight home after school, I headed in the opposite direction. I made my way over to Marzaline's house. Tall razor grass jostled with the dasheen bush and ratchet in her front yard. The dasheen bush was passing the razor grass with its enormous dark leaves, and the ratchet stood upright with its many hands fighting off grass and vine. The door and the windows of her house were tightly shut. Still, I paused in front of her gate or walked slowly past, as if I thought that her scandalous cackle would come floating out from somewhere inside. When one day I walked to the bus station with Anjani and waited for her for the bus, and then on top of that went to look at Marzaline's house, I reached home at a dangerous hour. Miss Velma greeted me with a She wore her mournful expression all the time now, and although she was never unkind to me, when she spoke to me it was in a grumbling voice. At the same time, she had an ear. I thought of someone who was slyly hoping for trouble. It was as though she was waiting for some great calamity that would allow her to bend her belly, hold her head, and bawl. She said without sounding too vexed. Well, you will say to your father when he caught you out in the road this hour. Mr. Cephas and I had very little to say to each other. Every so often he would sit in the drawing room and lecture loudly about ungrateful children. Yet he still tried, now and then, to start up a friendly conversation with me. Your own man still betting on you to come first in tests, you know. Don't let down me and your Auntie V. Mostly, however, he watched me like a dangerous prisoner out of the corner of his eye. He too seemed to be waiting for something unpleasant to happen, something of my doing. He was still in the habit of going through my school book, searching for high marks and words of praise from teachers. Sometimes, therefore, I did my homework at school and left all my exercise books in my locker so that he would have nothing to gloat over. Whenever Anthony did not come to school, I stayed in the classroom at lunchtime and ate with Doreen Sandiford's gang. On some days, they would disappear as soon as the afternoon roll had been called and only reappear at the end of the day. I began moving on with them. It was as though the whole school belonged to us. They knew every nook and cranny of the buildings and grounds, and we settled in a different hiding place each time. Between the lockers in empty classrooms, behind a wall of hibiscuses that seemed to grow wild and untended just a few yards from the home ec room. It was not only Spanish classes that we were skipping. We caught geography, history, even maths. Doreen had a little spindly cousin in our class who had to report to us at the end of every day and tell us what homework the teachers had given. But I soon began to have difficulties with the assignments because of all the classwork I was missing. Doreen just made a little cousin do hers for her when she couldn't. I would scribble down something and hand it up, but sometimes I did not bother. I certainly did not bother myself doing any Spanish homework for Mr. Terrari, only occasionally made a fuss over work not done. Every now and then he would rant and rave because out of the 35 of us, only 5 or 6 handed in his assignment. But on other days, he did not even remember to take up the word that he had given. My maths fell right down. But I thought I would just learn up everything in time for midterm tests so that the teachers would have good marks to put in my report book again. Yet it would serve Mr. Cephas right if I got a bad report. How caught up he would be if I were to fail at everything. But then, right after midterm test was carnival, and I was going home for carnival, so failing the test was out of the question. I had to have good marks to take home. There was still time, though. I decided I would dine with Doreen Sandiford and the others for 1 or 2 more weeks, and then I would start to take on the midterm test. One day at lunchtime, I noticed that Doreen's friends were moving more swiftly than usual towards the front of the classroom. Anthony was absent, so I was going to have lunch with them. Now they stood in a close knot by the desk, talking in low voices, and when I joined them, I realized that they were counting money. Where all you get that? I asked in alarm and backed away. This gang of boys and girls could do anything, even break in somewhere and take money. Janice caught my sleeve and pulled me back. Hush, she said in a dramatic whisper. We going in the plaza for chicken and chips. Put what you have. I don't have no money, I said, and started to move off, but Doreen Sandiford took me by the arm. Nah, she could come, she said to the others. We have enough, let's go. So I was on my way to the plaza, breaking the strictest rule of La Puerta Government Secondary School, putting God out of my thoughts, as Ma would say. And immediately I began to struggle to put Ma out of my thoughts, for if we were caught... I had been to the plaza several times with Miss Velma and with Uncle Leroy. When we came to town to sell the cocoa, Uncle Leroy would take Carlisle and me into the plaza and buy us a hot dog and soft drink. Then we walked around admiring the bright store windows before we took the bus home. Ma said she would not put her foot in there because it was not a place for poor people. The plaza was only about 10 minutes walk from the school if you went out the front gate and took the main road, but Doreen Sandiford's gang made their way across the playing field behind the school and squeezed through a break in the fence. Then we hustled through a maze of back streets. Once we were inside, we felt safe. The corridors were so crowded and busy that it did not seem likely that anyone would notice a few girls in La Puerta government sec uniform. One of the hottest calypsos of the carnival season was coming out of the piped music system, following us wherever we went. I go break out, I go break away, I go break out, I go break away. When you hear the shout, what they talking about? Me that break out, me that break away. Soon we were brazenly singing along with it and dancing our way from one store window to the next. We were inspecting the clothes on display, each of us pretending to the others that we were allowed to go to carnival fetes and that we were looking for an outfit to wear to the next fete. Nobody saw Mr. Tiwari until he shouted at us from the doorway of Ponderosa Wild West Bar and Saloon. Hey, what is this? What's going on here? Nobody waited to hear anymore. The whole group turned and stampeded through the plaza, running wildly until we were outside and safe in a back streets. Then Doreen Sandiford stopped and faced us, her arms akimbo. So wait, are you afraid to worry now? What happened to the chicken and chips? Not many of us were in favor of going back into the plaza now for anything on earth, but Doreen Sandiford sucked her teeth and headed back up the road. 2 others decided to go with her. The rest of us debated whether we should wait there, go back to school, or go back into the plaza with the others. Whatever we did, we were in trouble already. We decided to stay where we were, but to keep a sharp lookout all the while. They returned eventually with the boxes of chicken and chips. Swiftly we made our way through the back streets again. We squeezed to the fence and hid behind a dump of bushes on the edge of the playing field. There, we divided up the food and swallowed it almost whole. Just how a macadrew snake does eat, Ma would say. The bell rang. We did not know what to expect when we turned up for roll call. What was clear was that we should not be late for roll call. Doreen Sandiford assured us that Tawari was probably drunk and couldn't identify us, so we need not worry. We stood into our seats for roll call before Miss Hafiz arrived. She looked as calm and pleasant as always. She called the roll, made some announcements, and left. We, the Plaza gang, winked at each other in triumph. I did not cut any classes that afternoon. In fact, I vowed that I would now begin to prepare for the midterm test. No more playing the fool. It was one thing to spite Mrs. Cephas, but I still had Ma to face, and my uncles, and Pappy, and Mommy Patsy.
The next morning, however, before she called roll, Mrs. Highfies read out the list of names, the whole of Doreen Standiford's gang and me, and told us to go down to the conference room. We were caught. Mrs. Hafiz came to us in the conference room and spoke to us briefly before she went to her first class. Looking very disappointed and hurt, she told us that we were going to be suspended for a week. She instructed us to go and sit outside the principal's office and wait for a letter to take home. We would have to return with a parent or guardian to talk with the principal and then go home again. I was dazed. Ma prided herself on the fact that she had never yet been summoned into a school to answer for misbehavior from any child of hers. She warned us that the first child to bring such shame on her old head would be the one to send her to her grave. What was I going to do? We walked down to the principal's office with our hearts in our mouths. We sat waiting in silence until Doreen Sandiford said, in a matter-of-fact voice, "My father going to kill me with licks." Some of the girls burst into tears. Doreen Standiford continued to talk to herself. They sent for my parents when I was in primary school, and I carried the letters for my mother. She gave me 2 slaps, but said if I promised to behave myself, she wouldn't tell my father. Then she said if anything so happen again, she's telling him one time. So now my tail in fire. I had to work out what I was going to do. The letter would be addressed to Ma. I would have to go use the bus fare Ma had given me to come home for Carnival to go and deliver a summons to her instead. That was unthinkable. I would rather die. Now I wish that we had put down Mr. Cephas as my guardian when we came to register. How could I take such a letter to Ma? The solution was to have them address the letter to my father. He could do anything he pleased, go into rage, shout, hit me with a book, as long as Ma didn't find out about this. But he might send the news to my family. He might send a message right away, just for spite, just to upset Ma. No, I would have to take the letter to Miss Valma. She might be too frightened to let him know. It slowly dawned on me, however, that suspension might stay home. Not being allowed to go to school, he was bound to find out. But no, Mr. Cephas left early on mornings. Before I was ready for school, I was supposed to come home before him. I would just have to do some writing in my exercise book each day for when he would inspect them. The secretary called us up one by one to give us our letter. When it was my turn, I told her that I was living with my father and stepmother in La Porta now, Mr. and Mrs. Cephas, and that my grandmother was too old and sick to come all the way from Ballatier. She looked at me out of the corner of her eye. "Are you sure you're not trying something?" "No, miss. Look on my form and you will see my father's name, Orville Cephas." She scrutinized the form and then said, "Okay, so send it to Mr. and Mrs. Orville Cephas then." When Mrs. Valma finally opened the letter and read it, she sat down heavily and fanned herself. At first, she was not going to open the letter because Mr. Cephas' name was on it. I had to tell her what it was about in order to persuade her to open it before Mrs. Cephas could see it. Now she was looking as if the great calamity had arrived at last. She whispered, "Why you leave the school and go up there, child?" Some children were going for chicken and chips, and they... Chicken and chips? You went for chicken and chips? I didn't give you lunch from home. What happened to your lunch? Nothing, Miss Valma. Then why you have to leave the school and go for chicken and chips? You want your father to say that I ain't gave you no lunch? Eh, child? You want your father to vex with me? No, Miss Valma. She started to fan herself again. Child, why you bring this trouble on people? What going to happen when your father come home? Jesus Lord, deliver us. You going to tell my father, Miss Valma? She stopped fanning and peered at me. How you mean? And your father have to go and see the principal? You could go, Miss Valma. The teacher said to bring a parent or guardian. They didn't say you must bring your father. Miss Valma spent a long time studying her hands in her lap, turning them this way and that. I could see from her face that all kinds of things were going on inside her head. Then she rose slightly from the chair. I will have to put on my clothes, she said. Miss Valma sat wringing her hands while we waited to see the principal. Sometimes she muttered to herself. Then she sent me a long reproachful glance, and arranging herself on the chair. She sat now with her lips pursed, firmly holding her handbag on her lap. After some time, the vice principal passed through the lobby and stopped to find out what we were there for. Miss Valma handed him the letter. He scribbled rapidly on it, gave it back to her, and continued on his way. We sat still waiting for a moment until we realized that we had been dismissed. We made our way home, with Miss Valma walking so briskly that I had some trouble keeping up with her. The rest of the day I moved around beside Miss Valma, helping with housework, but her lips remained tightly pursed, and she seemed not to notice me at all. Michael came home, was fed, and disappeared again. When Mr. Cephas came home, Miss Valma was resetting her room. She hurried out and served him his food. He then, too, disappeared again. The next day was even more uncomfortable. Miss Valma was on tenterhooks. At the sound of passing cars, she would stop whatever she was doing and wait anxiously for a few moments. Every now and then she went into the drawing room and moved aside the curtains to peek outside. On the third day, she and I came near to suffering a heart attack. Mr. Cephas' car drew up at lunchtime. He was stamping through the house before we could even brace ourselves. Miss Valma was in the backyard washing. Mr. Cephas came upon me as I was in the kitchen mixing juice. He stood and glared at me. So tell me, what is going on here, miss? You get suspended from school and I don't even know, eh? I had to hear it from outside. Where is your stepmother? Valma. Mrs. Valma was already fumbling with the half-door latch. What is happening here? Valma, you know this child on suspension? What it is she tell you? She playing sick? No, Cephas, I know she's on suspension. What? So how I don't know, and I'm the one feeding and clothing her and sending her to school. How I don't know? I is a dog? Everyone in the world know my daughter in trouble, my wife and all know, and I don't know? I had to hear it from some young fella in my workplace who have a sister in the school. That is how I find out? Something going on around here, man. The two of you in complot against me, eh? Are you plan for me? Oh, you take a big man to make a fool? Miss Valma came inside and closed the door behind her. She seemed to take a deep breath. Her mouth trembled for a moment, but then she began to speak in a soft but determined voice. Cephas, she said, you bring your daughter here. You don't know the child don't know you, but you want your daughter to come and live by you. So you bring her, and what satisfaction you got out from that? All you get is trouble. This child should go back from where she belongs before you really get something you don't bargain for. Mrs. Valma stepped out of her half-dead frightened self. She had finished speaking, and Mr. Cephas was still standing looking at her with his mouth open. Uh-oh, he said finally. So now you want to tell me what I must do and what I must not do? First, all you gang up against me to cover up what was going on in my own house, and now you're giving me orders? But no, none of you would give me orders. I is the man in this house. I is the man. I is the man. Mrs. Valma stood her ground without a word. Mr. Cephas turned to me abruptly. So you're going to tell me what happened? What kind of shame is this you bring on me, eh? didn't know what to say to him. The silence was too much for Miss Valma now, and she told him what happened. "And so you take up yourself and go down there to answer for this little? You have no right. That is a disgrace to your name. Let her grandmother go and answer for her. They ain't teaching no behavior. Let them go and take the shame. You stay out of it. When she misbehaves, let her go to her grandmother." He ranted some more and then turned and marched back through the drawing room. We heard his car start and drive away. A few moments passed before Miss Valma seemed to shake herself out of a dream. She pulled a chair and sat down. "You want some juice, Miss Valma?" Arrow was already getting out the glass and ice. "Yes, child," she said to herself. "Give me some juice." When I turned around with the glass of juice, she was sitting with her head propped on her elbow, massaging her forehead. "Child," she groaned, "you caused enough trouble. I'm not against you, but I don't want you here. Better you go back. You're turning your father into a worse beast than he was to begin with." Miss Valma stopped herself, then got up, shaking her head, to go back to her washing. Many times that week I woke up in the night with a start, because I thought Mommy Patsy was standing over my bed, looking down at me, with Mrs. Valma's sorrowful face. The suspended students came back out to school just 2 days before the midterm test. Anjani was not at school on that day, and I was relieved. I did not look forward to seeing her. When she came to school on the following day, she could hardly even talk to me without sounding as if she would cry. "Lacey, you don't care nothing," was all she ever said about the suspension. For the whole day it lay like a heavy stone between us. Anjani seemed to be gazing at me reproachfully, out of an older person's eyes. I felt as if I was going around spoiling everything. I had made an enemy of Miss Velma, and now I let Anjani down so badly that it did not seem she would ever recover. She was struggling so hard to come to school, and I was throwing it all away. Then sooner or later, my family would find out about the suspension and my cutting classes and the low marks I was getting. I went into the midterm test with the same panic that Anjani felt at every test. I had missed more classes than she. There was no help I could offer her, for I had missed so much since the beginning of the term that I did not even know where the classes had reached. The first test was geography. I read through the question paper and my head began to spin. It was all gibberish to me. I did not know anything. I had even forgotten things I knew before. I was not much better off at maths or Spanish or any other subjects. I sat and wrote what I could, but I knew that I had failed miserably. Then right after the midterm test, I would not be going home for carnival, and I would have nothing good to show my family. At Christmas, I had taken home all my test papers, and everyone was so proud that Uncle Leroy had sent them to my mother, so that she would not be left out. Uncle Leroy was expecting me to bring my midterm test papers when I came home at carnival. "Well, you know it's only high marks you can make now, Miss Lady," he had said to me. "You can't go and make no duck, because we can't send that for your mother, for your Mommy Patsy. The post officer don't handle poultry." Now I couldn't even smile at his jokes. He would have nothing funny to say about these marks. Uncle Leroy was full of jokes, but he could get very sour with us for playing the jackass with school. Once he caught Carlyle roaming in Junction with a group of friends during school hours. There and then he made Carlyle take off his shoes and hand them over. Carlyle had to walk to school barefoot for days, and in the end it was Ma who begged Uncle Leroy to give him back his shoes. What were they going to say about my schoolwork? As for the suspension, I felt that Ma would just look at me and know the whole story. Nobody would have to tell her anything. I could not go home at carnival. I decided to write to Ma saying that I would save the bus fare and not bother to come home until the end of term. The school's carnival frolic was on Friday afternoon. Marlon Peter's gang was bringing out a band called Tales of the Meek Heroes. The characters in the band were Catch Tail, Cut Tail, Pissing Tail, Haul Your Tail, Tail Between Your Legs, Planner's Tail, and others. Charmaine Springer was entering the Calypso competition. Her Calypso name was Lady Reporter, and she had made up a Calypso called The Teacher Don't Know Me. I didn't stay for the frolic. On Carnival Monday and Tuesday, whenever the wind blew towards us from Main Street, it brought snatches of music.
but our part of town was very quiet, and I did not go out at all. Mrs. Cephas had left the house with a group of very merry cronies on the Sunday night, and only reappeared on Monday after the juvie was over, about 11 o'clock, to bathe and eat before he plunged back into the town. Miss Velma sent Michael to see the bands pass down Main Street, wanting him to be back before dark. She stayed at home, and so did I, she in her room and I in mine. By the time we were back out to school on Ash Wednesday, Anjani had softened again. She was more worried about me than reproachful. Her one concern was that I catch up with my schoolwork and begin to make good marks again. On mornings, she would ask anxiously, "Lacey, you do the homework?" And she would smile with relief when I took out my exercise books and showed her all my homework done. She did not let me out of her sight all day, following me everywhere, as tired as she was, to make sure that I did not slip away and hide instead of coming to class. But she was the one to worry about. She did not look well at all. Even her school shirt was wearing thin. It was no longer yellow. The color now was nearer to cream, and holes were beginning to appear in it.
Like the shirt, Ajane was beginning to seem very pale, even transparent. It was as if she was fading away. Sometimes her voice was almost a whisper, and her movements were slow and weary. In class, she propped her head on her elbow and fell asleep. When we had PE, the teacher didn't press her to take part in the games and exercises. She let her sit and watch. One day, Ajane didn't even open her lunch. "What happened, Anjane? You're not eating today?" I asked with some alarm, because she looked so worn out that I thought she could topple off the log at any minute. "No, I'm not feeling hungry. I will eat it later." I searched her face. "You're taking the pills the doctor gave you?" "Yes, I'm taking the pills." "Well, they're not helping you? You're not getting better?" Anjane bowed her head. She spoke as if musing to herself. "The doctor said I have to rest too. But how will I rest? I have to help my mother. And I want to come to school. I want to come to school and pass my exam." She had begun to speak fiercely. "And if I can't come to school and pass my exam?" She stopped, staring out across the playing field, where there was nothing to be seen. One morning, Anjane fainted in assembly. She just sank to the floor next to me without a sound. It took a few seconds before everyone was aware of what had happened. I was kneeling on the floor, trying to pick her up, when some teachers rushed over to us. They drew me away, and a teacher lifted her up in one scoop. As he hurried away with her dangling body, I tried to follow, but Mrs. Haviz put her arm around my shoulder and made me stay. Anjane didn't come to school the next day. That was not surprising. And yet I drooped for the whole morning, and then in the afternoon I went and sat behind the music room, feeling tense and uneasy. For 3 days, Ajane did not appear. On Friday morning, I woke up with such a heavy feeling that I could not move. A weight like lead seemed to be pressing down on me. My head and all my limbs felt like board, and right in the center, just above my navel, was a tight knot that was going to stifle me. It was the dream I had the night before. Mommy Patsy was sitting in class next to me in Ajane's thin faded shirt, but the circus horse barked something at her, and then her seat was empty. At another moment, Mommy Patsy was standing in the middle of Miss Velma's dashing patch, calling to me to bring her my geography book, but I had thrown the geography book in the dustbin at school. Then I was running down the road towards the school to get the geography book, running through all the back streets of La Puerta, turning corners right and left, but getting nowhere nearer to the school. So I went back to where I had left Mommy Patsy. But when I got there, it was Mazeline in the dashing patch, and she threw one reproachful glance at me and fell down dead from a stroke. The heaviness remained. In fact, it grew worse as I got ready for school. I moved so slowly that Miss Velma asked me whether I was sick. I replied that I was okay, but she continued to eye me as though she could see some trouble. As I walked to school that Friday, I thought of all the time I had wasted over the past weeks. I would have to settle down and get serious. I had to make sure that I had a good report at the end of the term to send to my mother. I sat in Mrs. Lopez's class trying to concentrate on mathematics, but I could not. Ajane had now missed a whole week of school. Was she too sick to come to school, or had she really given up? She had to come back to school. She just had to come back. Then I heard the circus horse angrily calling my name, and I suddenly realized that everybody was busy writing something while I sat and stared straight ahead of me. You, madam, what is going on? No, Miss Jugmohansen. Well, if you can't live without your sidekick, then you can go and join her wherever she is, if that is all the ambition you have. No, just as badly off as she. Anyway, when you play with the dog, you get fleas. I sprang to my feet in such a rage that my chair fell over with a terrible crash. Your mother must be the dog. Your mother. I couldn't believe that this was my voice shouting these words at a teacher. This was absolutely the rudest thing I have ever done in my whole life. So once more, I was sitting outside the principal's office, waiting for a letter to take home. I had pain in my belly and couldn't think straight. This time, I would have to take the letter to Mr. Cyphers, for Miss Velma was not going to stick her neck out for me again. Mr. Cyphers, not Mr. Cyphers, he had washed his hands off me. He had made it clear that if I got myself into trouble at school again, it would be Ma's business. Ma would have to be summoned to come into school because of me. The secretary called me and gave me the letter.
Then I had to go back to the classroom for my books. As I walked away, I was thinking about how Ma would have to put on her going out clothes to come into the school and hear about all my misdeeds. The plaza, the suspension, cutting classes, not studying. And now I had cursed the teacher's mother. All of this it would pile on her head. It would be very easy if she would just give me a licking. That would be a relief. But she probably would not lift a finger at me. She would just be sad and hurt and ashamed. And Poppy would have to hear about it too, and Uncle Leroy, and my mother working herself to death for us up in New York. As I climbed the steps, I realized that there was one big commotion going on upstairs. The whole floor was alive with excitement. Children were talking at the tops of their voices and darting in and out of classroom doors. My class was on its feet, except for two girls crying at their desks and Marlon Peters glued to his chair, thunderstruck. Everybody else was moving crazily about and all talking at the same time. I didn't know that I had caused such a stir. What I had said to Mrs. Lopez was so outrageous that it had almost shaken up the whole school. Then, what would it do to Ma? She would get a stroke right away. But nobody even noticed me. I was standing in the doorway and nobody was seeing me, so this couldn't be anything to do with me. Yet I was suddenly cold with fright, and I wanted to rush back out the door before I could hear what it was that had everyone in such quite a state of shock. Now everyone felt quiet. They stared at me speechless for a few seconds. Then the girl came to me and said, "Lacey, you ain't hear what happened? Anjane drink poison." I grabbed my books and rushed out. I didn't want to hear the rest. I knew. She was dead. I made my way blindly down the stairs. The whole school was buzzing now, and I walked faster and faster to the gate and out into the road. I was crossing streets, turning corners, weaving my way through traffic. The belly pain was much worse, and now my inside seemed to have turned to liquid. I found myself approaching the bus station. What I had planned to do there, I didn't know. Take a bus home? But Ma would be so ashamed and hurt and so heartbroken that she might have to go and lie down and we would have to fan her and she mightn't recover. And Mommy Patsy would have to give up a night school and come home. The dream of the night before was following me. I had let everyone down, and now what Anjane done to herself was my fault. She must have done it because I let her down. I made an about turn and shot back up the road. I had to stop thinking or my head would burst. When I was a good distance from the bus station, I slowed down. It was still early, not even lunchtime. Miss Velma would ask why I was home so early.
I would tell her that I had belly pains. I would ask her for a tablet. Miss Velma had all kinds of tablets for her high blood pressure, her anemia, for headache, for arthritis, for Mr. Cephas' gallstones, and Michael's worm fits. She kept them somewhere in her bedroom so that Michael wouldn't come and interfere with them. I started to walk fast again. I would get tablets for Miss Velma. I had to stop thinking. Miss Velma did not seem very surprised to see me. Somehow, she had already heard the news of Anjane and thought that the whole school had been sent home for the day. But what a thing, eh? These Indian girls so quick to take poison. You didn't know the girl? You know her? No, I said. I didn't know her. Then I asked if I could have something for belly pains. Like you drink some of what a girl drink, Miss Velma chuckled. She was quite taken up with the news, even a little excited. Then she got serious. Since morning I could see something happen to you, you know? What kind of bellyache is this? Now, come. I followed her into the bedroom. She pulled a chair to the wardrobe and climbed onto the chair. She rummaged on the top of the wardrobe for a while, then took down a shoebox. It was crammed full of little bottles, boxes, envelopes, and tubes, all helter-skelter. She sat on the bed with the box on her lap and eyed me for a moment. Tell me what it is. You turn a young lady? I was only half listening, for I was looking into the box and thinking that there must be medicine for every pain in the world. All right, Miss Velma was saying. I will give you something for belly pain, and then you will go and bathe. Miss Velma took out the bottle of yellowish fluid. She put her box back in its place and led me to the kitchen. There I swallowed 2 large spoonfuls of medicine without even tasting it. Go and bathe now, Miss Velma ordered. I nodded and went into my bedroom, where I sat down heavily on the bed. I was tired. Thoughts were racing around inside my mind, but I didn't want to think too much. Anjane, dead? I suddenly felt like screaming, and I had to put my hand over my mouth. I didn't want Miss Velma to come rushing in. Sooner or later she would go outside to take clothes off the line, or clean fish, or tend her flowers. She spent a lot of time in the yard when Mr. Cephas wasn't at home. As soon as she went outside, I would quickly find the box of medicine and take it into the bedroom with me. I heard her calling. Yes, Miss Velma, I called back. I was going to bathe just now. I cooling off. All right, I just going to sit down by the market to come back. Then I heard her approaching and bent down to take off my shoes and socks. She stuck her head in the door and said, in a dramatic whisper, as if the two of us were in a plot together, I put something in the bathroom cupboard, in case. You know how to fix up yourself. In case? I nodded. She left. As soon as I heard the front door close, I got up to go for the medicine box. I turned around to take my slippers from under the bed. And there, where I had been sitting, was a bright pink stain. Miss Velma was right. For a brief moment, I was very excited. I couldn't wait to tell Anjane. Now we were both grown-up young ladies. I would announce her as soon as... But Anjane wasn't there. Anjane wasn't gonna dare to tell me anything in my whole life ever again. I put my hands to my ears and squeezed them tight against my head. No, not true, I shouted. I sat down heavily. Something frightful was happening inside my head. A pounding, and giddy tightness. For a moment, I could not remember what to do next. Too many things were beating about in my head. Anjane saying, Lacey, you don't care nothing? The new suspension letter that I had in my notebook to take home to my family, and how Ma would have to put on her clothes and come up to La Puerta, and they would have to give her a seat and make her listen as they told her of all the things I had done. My head was going to burst. I had to stop thinking. I shut up. The medicine. I had to get some medicine. I rushed into the bedroom and dragged the chair to the wardrobe. The top of the wardrobe was piled high with all kinds of things, and I brought down the shower of old papers before I could find the shoebox. I jumped off the chair to gather up the papers scattered on the floor. I was scooping up dusty, tattered newspapers, receipts, Christmas cards, photographs, and letters, and suddenly there was a picture of Miss Velma in her high school uniform. My head was getting bigger and bigger all the time, stretching and stretching like a balloon. Now it was Anjane's eyes looking at me reproachfully out of the photograph, and I knew what she wanted to say to me. My head now seemed to burst into pieces, and I started to scream. I screamed until I didn't have to think anymore when everything went dark. It was not until the Easter holidays that I started to go out into the yard again. I had spent weeks indoors. After I came home from the hospital, I stayed in the bedroom day and night. I lay on the bed staring up at the underside of the roof for hours. What I was really doing was making my way across the room by traveling up and down the tracks in the galvanized. This was a very difficult task, and it needed a great deal of time and patience. The galvanized was like a big garden. Long beds lying side by side with canals in between. I had to walk the full length of every single bed and every single canal in order to get from one side of the room to the other. I had to cover the whole area. I could not miss a track. This took hours, and if you were not careful, you could easily slip off the track and end up in the wrong one and forget where you had reached. Every time this happened, I had to start all over again. Up the first track, down the next, up the next one. Nobody could get me out of the bedroom. I had hardly ate anything, and I did not talk. At first, Ruth and Kenwin would come to the door and stare, wide-eyed at me. When night fell, they tiptoed into the room and curled up beside me on the bed. Then they started coming into the room to chat, sometimes to tell me long stories of the dogs or the pigs. At night, they talked to me until they fell asleep. They did not seem to notice that I was not answering. To them, it was just as before, when we lay on the big bed together every night and talked until we were too tired to say another word. On some nights, Ma came and lay down on the bed next to me. She chatted with Poppy, who was lying on the bed on the other side of the partition. She hummed drowsy hymns. She told us stories of when she was a little girl, and the stories of when Mommy Patsy and Uncle Jamesy and Uncle Leroy were little. And when she thought we were all asleep, she raised herself gently off the bed and left. In the day, she would come and sit on the chair by the bed, peeling vegetables, grating coconut, or picking rice and talking about Marceline and how she was still not too well, but how much she was looking forward to my visiting her when I got well, about how the mango vert tree was bearing and Carlisle was eating all, about the big Thanksgiving she was planning to keep because her granddaughter had brought back to her. Sometimes, Poppy sat in the chair by the bed for hours, until he fell asleep on himself. Uncle Leroy would bring me a mango or a ripe fig and peel it for me. He would coax me to eat it, telling me that he had just managed to save that one mango or that one ripe fig from Carlisle and the pigs. You better hurry up and come outside, Lacey. They eating up everything. As the days passed, I began to realize that the house was overquiet. I could not hear Ruth and Kevin playing in the yard. Inside the house, the big people talked in whispers. Sometimes Uncle Jamesy was there, and sometimes Tansy Monica. But I had not seen my cousin since the hospital. Now I spent a lot of time straining my ears to pick up sounds from outside. The coquille broom scratching the ground, a hen singing loudly to let it be known that she had just laid her eggs, Uncle Leroy calling Carlisle, a neighbor passing down the trace and calling out to greetings to Ma. The quiet and whispering began to annoy me. I was glad whenever the children came in to tell me their news. A big bumpy crappo had hopped into the kitchen and Ma chased it out with a cocaine broom. Uncle Leroy was going to get watermelon for us. Carlyle had made mango chow for them, with hot pepper. Ma couldn't find the frizzle fowl, so she must be setting it in the bush. By now, I was able to run up and down the lines in the galvanized with no trouble at all. I took to sitting up on the bed to listen, instead of lying down with my eyes fixed on the roof. Then, one afternoon, Ma and Poppy were talking in low voices in the gallery, and I heard Ma saying sadly that she couldn't bring Colleen for Easter with Lacey still so sick. Slowly, I climbed down from the bed. I stood for a few seconds to steady my legs. I had not walked for a long time. When I appeared in the doorway, they were first too shocked to move. Then, Ma flew up and took hold of me. She led me to a chair, calling loudly all the while, "Leroy, Leroy, come quick, Leroy." Uncle Leroy came rushing around the side of the house with his cutlass in his hand. The dogs were right behind him. Then Carlyle, Ruth, and Kenwin came up a few moments later. Kenwin could not move very fast on his sharp bandy legs, and Ruth had to wait for him.
I was glad to be in the world again. Every morning I got up early and went down to the kitchen with Ma and Papi. They let me drink coffee with them, just a little drop, with plenty of milk, and we made chocolate tea for the little children. We kneaded the flour and fried little bakes, or we put one big bake to roast while we sipped our coffee. At first, they made me lie down and rest every afternoon, but after a few days I protested, because I was no longer sick or weak. I began to help Ma with the sugar cake again. Then, when Charlene came, I took over bathing the little children. At the end of each day, they wore a coat of dust dripped with mango or some other juice, and their feet were often encased in mud. I would fetch some buckets of water and fill the bath pan in the backyard. When I had scrubbed, rinsed, and dried each one, I put them to sit on the back steps. They put their clothes on, and I sat on the steps and combed their hair while Ma or Uncle Leroy made tea down in the kitchen. A few days before the end of the holidays, I put on Ma's boots and tied my head with the cloth to go down in the land with Uncle Leroy and Carlyle. We walked past my garden, which was all in bush.
"Well, that is the end of Dolly Garden," Uncle Leroy said. "Now you're going down and make real garden. You have to make garden to eat now, girl, because you're not getting Mr. Cephas's grocery food again." Uncle Leroy had already explained to me that my father was still going to buy my book and uniform each year, but that was all. He refused to give me money to help feed me or to pay the taxi fare to Junction. One day, while I was still sick, Pappy, Uncle Jamesy, and Uncle Leroy had gone to see my father in his office. They had told him that I could not live with him, but that he still had to help me, or I would not be able to finish secondary school. Once Uncle Leroy would not tell me what exactly had happened in the office, or how they had persuaded my father to help me. I would just make him sweat a little, was all. He would say, giving a wicked smile, "Man, we could have sweat out the taxi money out of here. Taxi money, lunch money, anything, but your dotish grandfather stopped us," and making one big speech. "We have our pride and our dignity. Keep your filthy look, man, and live with your conscience. We are thankful for small mercies God will provide."
Uncle Leroy's imitations of Pappy always made me laugh. We were sitting on the back steps, and I laughed so loudly that Ma poked her head through the kitchen window and peered up at us. A smile spread over her face. "Well, here you. Girl, you're alive." Early one morning, the frizzled fowl came strutting into the yard with a noisy band of chicken behind her. Ma said that those chickens would be mine, and when the hens started to lay, I could sell the eggs in the market so that I would have a little taxi fare. She was not happy about my having to get up so early every morning to catch the bus. She called curses down on my father for his stinginess and fretted to herself that she did not know how the child would make out. For the morning, the poor child would be on the road as though she was going to do estate work. "Don't mind that, Ma," I said. "Angie used to have to wake up 4 o'clock in the morning to go to school."
I thought about Angie a great deal. I wasn't afraid to think about her now. Sometimes I still dream that the two of us were on a bus together going somewhere and talking to each other. As the reopening of school drew closer, I felt as though I was taking up her life. For just like her, I would now have to set out early in the morning and travel miles to school. At home, I would have plenty of work to do, and I would have to go and help with selling the things that Ma and Carlisle made during the week. We had to make ends meet, for we did not want to trouble Mammy Patsy for anything more than she was already sending us. She had to have her chance too, and we would have to learn to cut and contrive. Ma said so that Mammy Patsy would have money to go to school. My thoughts went to La Puerta Government Secondary School and to the Cephas's. I felt very sorry for Michael. I decided that I would go and visit him one day, and Miss Velma, and even my father. When I tried to think of Miss Lopez, all that came into my mind was Marlon Peters, decked in all his sister's clothes, with his grandmother's stockings sliding down his legs. Then Miss Lopez became a carnival character on Juve morning, beating on an old rusty pitch oil tin and making a long, incomprehensible speech. On the weekend before I went back to school, Uncle Leroy and his friends started to build the big bamboo tent in the backyard for this Thanksgiving. Ma was planning to feed everybody in Sokolal trays as well as all her grandchildren. Macama's relatives, friends, and enemies, it seemed. All the neighbors had already agreed to lend us chairs, and a whole gang of neighbors and Macama's were going to come and help with the cooking. The Saturday after the reopening of school was my birthday, and that was the day when Ma was going to keep the Thanksgiving.